kind of beginning for a legendary hero.
Does it come in black?
He fights for family and lives for love.
Batman Begins occupies an interesting place in superhero movie history. By this point, the X-Men were on their way out, for now, and the MCU is only 3 years away from taking the world by storm. With Mr. Wayne himself, it's been about 8 years since he graced the big screen, and
It should have been you! It's your fault! If you had told Superhero you weren't...
it was about time for a comeback. Here to save the day was an up-and-coming Christopher Nolan. With his trusty IMAX cam in hand, he had a singular goal: return the Dark Knight to his roots with a more grounded interpretation of the world's greatest detective. So, after more than a decade of superhero films, and not one, but 2 Batman later, does Nolan's first crack at the Caped Crusader hold up? Well, you saw the title of the video.
Well, I don't know what I expected.
Like many people, Batman is up there as one of my favorite superheroes, beaten only by his best friend and son in my personal favorites. While I like Batman, this review retrospective won't be all sunshine and roses. Batman Begins has its fair share of weird stuff. Most of it is harmless fun you can laugh at and move on. Other parts, however, are a little harder to ignore. But there's still a lot this movie did well. After all, it inspired an entire era of dark, grounded superhero movies, for better and for worse. While I'll be focusing on the first of the Nolan trilogy, the others will get referenced here and there as well, so consider this your spoiler warning for all 3. With that out of the way, let's check out why Batman Begins still holds up. Mostly. Like most intro superhero movies, Batman Begins can be broken down into 2 halves: the origin of the superhero, and the struggle the newfound hero has to deal with. And the origin half of this movie is phenomenal. This adoration comes from how much time is spent on the man beneath the cowl. The first half hour interweaves flashbacks of Bruce's training before staying in the present for the rest of the film. Nolan's specialty isn't just a gimmick here either. The time jumping is a great way to add insight into Bruce's character while still moving the story forward. As he gets stronger, we see more of what made him who he is, so far. And while we're on the subject, I like how the Wayne's deaths are handled here. The actual event happens in an instant, but the camera lingers on Bruce as the full weight of everything washes over him. The thing is, Nolan and co aren't doing anything to reinvent the wheel here. Even in 2005, we all knew who Batman was. Dead parents, brooding, and justice. It's that simple. But it's the extra pageantry that makes Batman Begins hit different. It's cool how you can see his sadness evolve into anger and guilt through the years. There's clear progression from the thirst for vengeance to justice. And that drive was so intense, the guy threw himself into prison just to bully criminals. It's crazy. No wonder why the Joker is drawn to him. The writing in the first act paints a vivid picture of who Bruce Wayne is, but Christian Bale deserves props too. He does an excellent job as this interpretation of the character. There's this fiery, brash nature that makes perfect sense for a rookie Bruce Wayne. While it's usually well hidden, you can see it come through in certain scenes due to the intensity of Bale's performance.
You didn't know my father. But I know the rage that drives you.
And of course, it's on full display as Batman. He's more than just angsty too. There's a dry sarcasm that's consistent with Bruce throughout the movie. And when he interacts with anyone that isn't Alfred, Lucius, or Rachel, Bale really sells the idiotic playboy persona. If there's one thing I would have preferred, it's that I wish the movie gave Bruce a little more. As any fan will tell you, Batman is more than a brooding vigilante.
Am I blue?
There's a scene later where he tosses Joffrey a goober, and it's kind of a missed opportunity to not show a softer side with something like an extended version of this. While angsty Batman is done very well, why not take the opportunity to show a little bit more of his compassion and humanity? It's pretty important to his character, and it would go a long way towards giving audiences more reasons to like him.
I'm dying very soon.
Yes. I'm sorry.
Could you stay with me? I'm scared.
But this is less a criticism and more of a preference. What we have is perfectly fine for the kind of movie Batman Begins is. It's not fair to ask Bruce Wayne to become Batman overnight, and as the first of what will become a trilogy, there should be some room to grow. Besides Bruce's characterization, his progression is a joy to watch. While skilled,
Got you! Broken arm! Boom! 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 Broken nose! Boom! 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 Broken nose! Boom! Ha! Gonna flip you!
it's obvious he's a wrecking ball of emotions looking for a target. I've always had a soft spot for training arcs because it's gratifying to watch characters grow mentally and physically. Batman Begins is no exception to this. It helps that Liam Neeson is doing a wonderful job as the mentor figure. That lofty Jedi way of speaking works here since Ducard is supposed to be someone with vast wisdom acquired through years of training. We'll talk more about him later, so put a pin in that for now. Also, the Ice Duel is the best fight in the entire movie. The choreography in this movie ain't great. But you wouldn't be able to tell that from this fight. The wide, sweeping shots are gorgeous, and it's mixed with meaningful dialogue, ninja stuff, and swordplay. Yeah, it's no warehouse brawl, or even anything like the Batman, but the bar for fisticuffs is low across the trilogy. Credit where credit is due. The other standout scene is in the flashback right before Bruce confronts Falcone. It's brief, but it's a fantastic use of wordless storytelling that tells us everything we need to know about what he's feeling and the origin of his moral code. And it's from the guy who penned scenes like this.
I'm the protagonist of this operation.
From there, things stay in the present after Bruce leaves his old life behind with nothing but the clothes on his back. After a montage of Bruce traveling the world, he gets a final test, and it's cool that in this scene, and the one after, we see glimpses of Bruce's ingenuity. We don't really get a whole lot of that later, but it's nice here nonetheless. Then, he gets the secret final test. Execute a criminal, which, of course he doesn't.
I will go back to Gotham and I will fight men like this, but I will not become an executioner.
We'll get to that. That aside, another cool thing about this scene is that this is the first time in the film you hear Hans Zimmer's leitmotif for Batman. I can't show you because Warner Brothers will get mad, but it's a neat audio indicator that shows this is the turning point where Bruce Wayne becomes Batman, not this. Bruce's return kicks off the second act, which is mostly devoted to catching us up to current affairs in Gotham and Bruce's further growth into the cowl. As Bruce DIYs his suit and checks out the local dealership, the supporting cast and villains take center stage. In the bad guy corner, Carmine Falcone and Scarecrow fill the void left by Ra's al Ghul. Falcone is a good representation of the normie criminals in Gotham, and he's out of the story by the halfway point anyway. Scarecrow, on the other hand, is a little more interesting. At first glance, he's the one best suited to take the mantle after Ra's bites the dust. After all, he's a proper member of Batman's Rogues Gallery. But in reality, he's marginally more important than Falcone in this movie. This isn't a bad thing either. The movie doesn't try to trick you into thinking he's a big deal. Not long after he's introduced, he mentions a mysterious benefactor, who we later learn is Ra's al Ghul. And thematically, Scarecrow makes a lot of sense since fear has been a core theme of the movie up to this point. Plus, a doctor using chemicals as weapons isn't that much of a stretch, unlike some of the other villains. It'd have been fun to see him in a larger role, but he's fine as an intermission. And he sticks around for the later movies. In the good guy corner, it doesn't need to be said that both Morgan Freeman and Gary Oldman do a wonderful job as Lucius Fox and Jim Gordon respectively. They're practically ripped straight from the other stories. But I can't really say the same thing about our next character, the non-comic, Nolan original, Rachel Dawes. Before going on, I want to ask you, what's her role in the story? You can answer this easily with everyone else. Scarecrow is a villain with thematic relevance, Gordon is one of the good boys, Fox is the gadget guy, and so on. So, what's Rachel's? As far as I can see, she serves 3 roles. She's another good person in the corrupt city, similar to Gordon. She serves as Bruce's moral compass to point him in the right directions. And lastly, she's his love interest. The first point makes sense. Gordon can't be the only paragon in Gotham, and Harvey Dent isn't canon yet. But as a romantic interest, she's about as good as the fight choreography. Now, to be completely fair to the writing team, it's really hard to capture the nuance and complexity of a romance between two people in only 1 to 3 hours. Romance works in something like Portrait of a Lady on Fire because the entire 2-hour runtime is dedicated to it. Compare that to something like a superhero movie where romance gets significantly less time and attention, and you can see why it's an uphill climb. Of course, there are exceptions to this. There's a lot of good shortcuts that can make a romance work in spite of the difficulty. Giving the characters some history, or chemistry between the actors or characters are great examples of this, just to name a few. Now, Rachel is Bruce's childhood friend, which is a good start. But that's all she has. Every scene Rachel has with Bruce is either talking about the plot or talking down to him in some way, usually both. And they don't have a cute back and forth when they argue. They just go,
"And that sounds like it's not my problem,"
and move on. When you look at the movie, it's hard to tell if the actors don't have chemistry, or if the writing behind them doesn't give them enough to work with. Even good actors won't pull their weight if the writing doesn't give them something.
She misses this place. So do I.
Yeah. But it's nothing without the people who made it what it was. Now there's only Alfred.
And you?
I'm not staying, Rachel.
You're just back for the hearing.
The only indicator Rachel is even romantically interested in Bruce comes at the end of the movie. By then, it's too little too late. Most of her screen time is dedicated to attorney work and talking down to Bruce. The romance in Batman Begins is no different from any generic movie romance. I'm sure we can all remember times when a movie just shoves two people together without actually building the relationship. If it doesn't add anything substantial, why bother adding it at all? And the thing is, romance can absolutely work here. The fact that one of Batman's most celebrated movies is, in part, a love story speaks volumes to how it can resonate with people when done well. If the romance in this movie was written well, it would make the next one even better. We, the audience, would actually be invested in Rachel's character when but it's not written well. As a result, Rachel is easily the weakest character in the movie. She's serviceable as another good person in Gotham, if not overshadowed a bit by Gordon, and underwhelming as a love interest. You may be wondering, hey, what about the moral compass point? Well,
Your father would be ashamed of you.
she ain't great at that either. You could cut the scenes where she guides Bruce and nothing changes. It's not that hard to see how Bruce could come to those conclusions on his own. He does in every other iteration anyway. Besides, Bruce doesn't need Rachel as a moral compass. He has a way better one. That honor goes to none other than Alfred Pennyworth. If there's one thing everyone agrees on, it's that Michael Caine kills it as Alfred. He's perfect as Bruce's true father figure. He's always there to let him know when he's going too far and to pick him back up when he falls. He does a wonderful job as Bruce's emotional anchor across the trilogy. So much of the latter half of Batman Begins and the sequels wouldn't work as well without his guiding presence. Alfred is so good, it completely overshadows anything Rachel tries to do or say. So, in short, the supporting cast in this movie works really well. It's just Rachel that sticks out like a sore thumb. It's not enough to bog down the movie, but it stands out when everything else is pretty solid. As we move on, there isn't a lot to say about the second act. Until the third act, it's basically Batman Year 1 featuring a Scarecrow. What I mean by that is you have all the hallmarks of your standard Batman story. You get it all, from beating up thugs, gentle persuasion,
Where were the other drugs going?
and skirmishes with the Rogues Gallery. While it's good, it's not going to knock your socks off. It's a solid way to show Batman using everything he's learned by this point in a simple but effective way. The plot comes to a head once Bruce apprehends Scarecrow. After another run-in with Gotham's finest, a pretty flashy and long one at that. You, gonna pay for that, Bruce? Batman returns to his manor to find his old mentor crashing the party, only to reveal that Ducard was the real Ra's al Ghul the whole time.
just some idiot with balloons.
Oh, is it?
Joking aside, making Ra's a title is a clever take on immortality instead of bringing in the Lazarus Pit. As far as Ra's himself, he's a respectable final boss. He's the embodiment of justice when it's taken too far, and it makes sense for Bats to face someone like him as his final test. But what holds Ra's back from the top tier of supervillains is his lack of time. He's an important character in the first act, but only gets so much time to actually be the villain. The most he does after coming back is beat up Bruce, monologue,
Commitment to justice.
Way of true justice. Justice is balance.
Justice!
and get beaten up. There's a lot of potential here based on his motivations and relationship to Bruce, but the movie ends before we see any of that used in a meaningful way. And he gets killed off, sorry is not saved, so this is all we get of him unlike Scarecrow. While Ra's is fine, he's slightly underwhelming since he returns so late. I'd have loved for him to show up earlier and show off some of his darker or more interesting traits, but the movie is 2.5 hours long as is, so I get why he doesn't. Unfortunately, it does make him the weakest of the trilogy's main villains. Then again, he's got stiff competition.
Oh my god! Ha! Joker! Anyways!
I got a Razzie Zazzy for Bang.
It's Bane! You know it's Bane! I'm here every day, Todd. Goddamn millennial.
So far, the first 2 acts of Batman Begins have been solid, complete with good character writing and a well-paced, escalating plot. But while I've mostly been positive, in my opinion, the 3rd act is where the movie really falters. What always stood out to me was how much bigger the scale got and how detached it is from where things started. The movie started out as a character-driven story, transitioned into classic hero hijinks, and devolved into a dumb action scene by the end. Sound familiar? There's more where that came from. Set pieces like this are unpopular because, for the most part, they lack the personal or emotional gravitas for a fulfilling finale. There's a world of difference watching the Avengers fight faceless jabronis versus, say, the original 3 Avengers facing the Mad Titan. And yeah, technically, Batman has personal stakes here. It's somewhat Bruce's fault for this mess since he saved Ra's earlier, and Ra's himself has a relationship with Bruce. But what's on paper is different from what's happening in the movie. What happens next is Rachel goes on an escort mission, Gordon borrows the Batmobile, and Bats beats up ninjas before hopping on the Justice Express to fight Ra's. I can forgive most of it if it was fun to watch, but it's really not. While the Gordon parts are cute, the rest isn't. Between stranger danger and the terrible fights, there isn't a lot that's very engaging. Then, we get to the final fight with Ra's, and it's this cramped, messy brawl that ends as quickly as it started. There's no weight to what should feel like an emotionally and thematically rich final fight. And I know a lot of this makes sense when you look at the script. The fear gas and microwave are set up in advance, so there's logical explanation for the chaos. And it makes sense that the final fight is cramped and short because they're on a speeding train. But making sense isn't the same thing as being entertaining. We all know what that looks like.
I'm the protagonist of this operation.
And the thing is, you don't need to do much to improve the climax in Batman Begins. It has all the makings of a great finale baked in. Imagine, if you will, a remix of the events. Keep everything as is, but cut the city and train parts in half, and scale things back to a final 1v1 with Ra's in the streets of Gotham. No train, no items, just one final duel. Not only would it present an opportunity for better choreography, it gives the main villain more screen time, and makes the most out of what could be a deeply personal duel between master and student. Even around 2005, this wasn't a novel idea. Raimi's first Spider-Man does this well by starting on a larger scale, then dialing it back to a personal, final confrontation. And many movies before and after this one have some variation of this. And if it's changed to a proper 1v1 in another area, Batman doesn't have to kill Ra's at the end. He didn't need to in the first place, but there's even less of a reason to leave him on a speeding train to die. I wouldn't have minded this if the movie perhaps waited to establish Batman's moral code until after this, but the first act clearly draws the line Batman won't cross. Yeah, technically he didn't kill Ra's, but leaving him to die isn't much better than the next Batman. I still don't mind it as much as some fans, but like with Rachel, it's such a weird writing choice when a good chunk of the movie is written pretty well. In any case, after Ra's gets sent to the Shadow Realm, Rachel confesses her love to Bruce, because of course she does. But she makes the sensible choice to not be with him until he's finished saving Gotham. Ooh, might want to rain check on that one. The movie closes with the birth of the Bat Signal and a teaser for what's to come. Which brings us back to the question posed earlier. Do you think Batman Begins holds up? For the most part, I'd say it does. The first act might be one of my favorite origin movies ever. The characters are quite good, most of the time, and it's paced and shot well, as you'd expect of a Nolan production. There isn't a lot to complain about in Batman Begins because the movie is strong where it counts. While I personally feel the romance and final act are underwhelming, among other things, it doesn't detract from the rest of the movie. At its core, Batman Begins does a good job of capturing why the character is so beloved by fans everywhere. Getting some of the character right is what separates it from films that try the dark, gritty take on a superhero. You can't just make everyone moody and violent and call it a day. You still need to nail some core elements of these characters. And I don't mean the little things like the backstory or the powers. That's the easy part. We don't like these characters because they're gods amongst men. We like them because of who they are and what they stand for. Getting back up after a tragic loss. Giving hope to the hopeless. Or doing everything in your power to ensure nobody experiences the pain you did as a child. If Nolan didn't accomplish at least a fraction of that, it would have fallen into the same pitfalls the others have. Is it a perfect interpretation of Batman? No way. I'm sure we can all name what we love in our ideal Batman movie. But it's just good enough to give fans like us something to enjoy, and to give newcomers a reason to join the club. Let me know what you think about Batman Begins in the comments, whether you liked it or hated it. I'd be interested in what you think nonetheless. And if you enjoyed revisiting Batman Begins as much as I did, I encourage you to stay tuned. The others are going to get their spotlight soon enough. And as good as this movie is, the next one is even better. Heya! Thanks again for taking the time to sit through this. I plan on getting to the sequels eventually, but it might take some time since I really want to do them justice. There's a few other projects that I plan to be releasing in between though, and I'll definitely include what those are in the description. And if you like what you saw here, or if you like any of the other future projects I have coming up, I encourage you to like and subscribe. Till then, I'll see you next time.